For hundreds of years, people have looked at the world around them and stared at the sky at night and wondered how it all came to be and what the purpose of it all is. As technology and science have developed, we've been able to see that the Earth is not flat, but a sphere. The cosmos is not held up on the shoulders of a Greek god, and our planet is not carried along on the back of a giant turtle. But while such mythology and fantasy have been shown to be false, the Bible gives us the answer to the origin of life. The ancient book of Job, possibly written as long ago as 2000 BC, around the time of Abraham, says, "He, God, stretches out the north over empty space. He hangs the earth on nothing." Job 26, verse 7. An accurate description of how our planet seems to be floating in the vacuum of space. Psalm 102, verse 25 adds, "Of old you," that is God again, "laid the foundations of the earth, and the heavens," that is sky, "are the work of your hands." Let's now look in more detail at the account of creation itself, which is contained in the first book of the Bible, Genesis. Genesis means beginnings in Greek, and this is indeed a book of beginnings. The beginning of the Bible record, containing a record of how this world and everything in it was created. The very first verse, Genesis 1 verse 1, tells us that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. Belief in the existence of God is something that comes from personal reflection, studying the Bible, and a consideration of the wonders of creation. For example, we exist on a planet that provides the perfect conditions for life, such as a breathable atmosphere and the ability to produce food and drink to survive. And it's situated at just the right distance from just the right sort of sun. And while much of the way we divide time is based on astronomy, such as a day being the rotation of the Earth on its axis, and a year being the time it takes for the Earth to orbit the Sun, the 7-day week does not relate to any particular astronomical phenomena. So where did that come from? Well, we see the 7-day week originating in Genesis chapter 1, and these are the 7 days from light to life that we're going to focus on in this talk. The process of creation took place over the course of 7 days, with God resting on the 7th day. Some say that the record in Genesis 1 is a symbolic description of 7 periods or phases of creation. While this may be true, there's no reason to doubt that a supreme and omnipotent God could not create the world and everything in it in 7 literal days if he chose to do so. As an example, in his second letter, the Apostle Peter tells us that with God, a day is as 1,000 years, and as 1,000 years as 1 day. So turning to Genesis 1 verse 1, we read that God created the heavens and the earth. Verse 2 tells us that the earth was without form and void, and that darkness was on the face of the deep. As the book of Genesis was originally written in Hebrew, we can look at the Hebrew words for more explanation. The words for form and void tell us that at this stage, creation was empty and disordered. The deep refers to an abyss of water over which the Spirit of God was hovering. So even in the midst of this barren, disordered emptiness, God was there. In verse 3 of Genesis 1, we have the first recorded words spoken by God: "Let there be light." God caused light to come into the creation and saw that it was good. In verse 4, God divided the light from the darkness to create night and day. And evening and morning were the first day. So we also have the concept of time being introduced at this point. Genesis 1 verses 6 to 8 describe the second day. In this God divided the waters so that some was above and some below, creating a firmament or expanse in between. This was the creation of the sky. Although in some translations it's rendered as heaven, it does not refer to the place called heaven where God dwells. It is in fact the sky. Verses 9 to 13 describe the events of the third day. God had gathered together the water under the sky into one place and caused dry land to appear. He also instructed the land to produce grass, plants, and trees. And for the second time, we're told that what God saw was good. Next, on the fourth day, Genesis 1 verses 14 to 19, God created lights in the firmament and caused the sun, moon, and stars to become visible. Again, he saw that it was good. There are a couple of interesting things to note here. Firstly, the creation on day 4 relates to the light that was created on day 1. And as we will see, days 5 and 6 relate to days 2 and 3, respectively. Secondly, God set the lights in the sky to be for signs and seasons and for days and years. We've already talked about the day being the Earth's rotation and the year being the orbit around the sun. And since creation, people have used the signs of creation to determine the seasons. This promise of this perpetual cycle is reiterated by God to Noah in Genesis chapter 8 verse 22, where God says, "While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, winter and summer, and day and night shall not cease." And so, thousands of years later, we still see the sun ruling the day and the moon ruling the night. On the fifth day, Genesis 1 verses 20 to 23, God created living creatures for the water and birds to fly in the sky. The realms of water and sky both being created by the separation of the waters on the second day. Note that Genesis 1 verse 20 does not say just fish, but living creatures to live in the water. Psalm 104 verses 26 and 27 talks about the sea, and where the psalmist writes, "This great and wide sea, in which are innumerable teeming things, living things both small and great. There the ships sail about. There is that Leviathan which you have made to play there." A great description of ocean life. An interesting point about this fifth day is that we have the first recorded blessing in the Bible, Genesis 1 verse 22. God blessed the birds and the sea creatures and told them to fill the waters and multiply on the earth. So we come to the sixth day, Genesis 1 verses 24 to 31. This links back to the work of the third day when God created land and vegetation. On the sixth day, he created living creatures for the land, cattle, creeping things, and beasts of the earth. As with previous days, God saw that what he had created was good. But there was more to come on this day. God also created man and woman, us. Genesis 1 verse 27 tells us that man was created in God's image. Genesis chapter 2, which adds some more detail on certain aspects of creation, tells us that God formed man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being. Genesis 2 verse 7. So we see how God's Spirit gives life to all creatures. We know that breath is essential for life and that blood takes oxygen around the body. This is also something we find in the book of Leviticus, written around 1400 years before the time of Jesus. Leviticus 14 verse 17 tells us that blood is the life of all flesh. Its blood sustains its life. Psalm 104 also talks about the cycle of life and death. Verses 29 and 30. You hide your face, they are troubled. You take away their breath, they die and return to their dust. You send forth your spirit, they are created, and you renew the face of the earth. Genesis 2 also describes how woman was created from a rib taken from the first man, Adam. Adam is the Hebrew word for man. God also gave man and woman dominion over the animals. He blessed the man and woman and told them to fill the earth, just as he had done to the sea creatures and birds. At this point, God again looked at what he had created, and this time it was not just good, but very good. Genesis 1 verse 31. Genesis 2 tells us that thus the heavens and earth were finished, and that on the seventh day God rested. He also blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, and this is the day we now call Saturday. After the seventh day, we do not have the phrase, there was evening and morning. After the work of creation and bringing order from disorder and creating life to fill emptiness, God rested in order to live in harmony with his creation. We have a hint of this in Genesis chapter 3, where we read of God walking in the Garden of Eden that he had planted for man to live in. This intent of God to live in harmony and fellowship with his creation is the foundation of the whole Bible. Sadly, this was not possible because of the subsequent failure of Adam and Eve to obey God, which resulted in sin and death being brought into the world. But the good news is that since the time of creation, God has had a plan for saving the world from the state it's in now. It's interesting that light and water were among the first things to be described in the Genesis account of creation. When God's Son Jesus was born and lived on the earth, he described himself as the light of the world and said that whoever follows me shall not walk in darkness, but have the light of life. The Gospel of John, chapter 8, verse 12. So just as God brought literal light into the world at creation, and we know how essential light is for life, so Jesus brought spiritual light into the world to provide a means of salvation from sin and preach the good news of the kingdom of God. This kingdom, which will be established in the future when Christ returns, will surpass the current state of creation, very good. It will be a perfect kingdom where pain and sorrow will be a thing of the past. The book of Revelation also describes it as a new heaven and a new earth, Revelation 21 verse 1. And later we are told there will be no night there. There will be no lamps or need for the light of the sun, because God will give them light. Revelation 22 verse 5. In order to be part of this coming kingdom, it's necessary to believe in the death and resurrection of Jesus, which destroyed the power of sin, and to be baptized into his name. Baptism involves the full immersion in water, which is the interesting point of connection back to the early mention of water in the creation account in Genesis. The Bible has a golden thread of salvation running through it from start to finish, and although we have primarily focused on the original 7 days of creation in this talk, it's important to note that God's involvement with his creation did not end there. The Bible's ultimate message is one of hope to those who believe. And so, to echo the words of Peter in chapter 3 of his second letter, we, according to his promise, look for a new heavens and a new earth in which righteousness dwells.